I'm Zoe, and if someone had told me 4 years ago that my marriage would be hanging by a thread, I'd have laughed in disbelief. But here I am, sitting alone in what used to be our shared bedroom, thinking about where it all went wrong. It was a regular evening at the Hendersons, my in-laws. The dining room was always too warm, and Mrs. Henderson's cooking was, well, an acquired taste. My husband, Michael, was always quiet during these dinners, probably trying to avoid any drama. "Zoe, dear, could you pass the salt?" Mrs. Henderson's voice cut through my thoughts. I obliged, trying to smile. "So, Zoe," she started, eyeing me like a cat does a mouse. "How's your little job at the boutique going?" "It's going well, Mrs. Henderson. We just got a new line of summer dresses in," I replied, trying to sound upbeat. "That's nice. A real career woman," she said, the sarcasm dripping from each word. Michael shot me a look, his way of saying, "Just ignore her." The conversation was superficial until Mrs. Henderson, with a glass of wine in hand, decided it was time to drop her bombshell. "You know, Michael, Jenna called me the other day. She's doing so well. Just got promoted at her law firm." Michael's fork paused midair. "Mom, we've been over this." "Oh, I'm just saying, it's nice to see young people making something of themselves. Not that running a boutique isn't quaint," she said, her eyes on me. I felt my face flush with anger. Before I could respond, Michael intervened. "Mom, Zoe's doing great at her job. Let's not start this again." Mrs. Henderson shrugged. "I'm just speaking my mind. It's a mother's right, isn't it?" The rest of the meal passed in awkward silence. I helped with the dishes, more out of obligation than desire. Mrs. Henderson watched me like a hawk, commenting on everything from the way I stacked the dishes to how I wiped the counter. "Zoe, you're doing it all wrong. Here, let me," she said, snatching the dishcloth from my hand. Honestly, I don't know what kids these days are taught at home. I bit my tongue, counting the seconds until we could leave. Michael was silent, his usual response to his mother's antics. It was like he put on blinders whenever we were around her. On the drive home, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Michael, your mother is impossible. She criticizes everything I do. Can't you see that?" Michael sighed, keeping his eyes on the road. "She's just set in her ways, Zoe. You know how she is. But it's always about me. She never misses a chance to put me down. And you just sit there and let her. Zoe, please. Let's not do this now. She's my mom. What do you expect me to do?" I stared out the window, feeling a mix of anger and helplessness. "Stand up for me, maybe? Just once." Life after that dinner at the Hendersons took a nosedive. It was like living in a slow-moving nightmare. I tried to shake off the feeling, but Mrs. Henderson's words, her disapproval, clung to me like a bad smell. Michael and I were like two ships passing in the night. Our conversations, once filled with laughter and plans for the future, were now just about the mundane: bills, groceries, the weather. I missed him, even though he was right there. One evening, I decided to cook Michael's favorite, spaghetti bolognese. I was in the kitchen, lost in the rhythm of chopping and stirring, when Michael walked in, home from work. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "Thought I'd make your favorite tonight." He glanced at the pot and then at me. "Thanks, but I'm not really hungry." I frowned. "You sure? I can keep it warm for later." He shrugged. "Maybe. I've got some stuff to do in the study." As he walked away, I felt a familiar pang of disappointment. I served myself a plate and ate alone at the kitchen table. The next weekend, we were back at his parents' place. I braced myself for another round with Mrs. Henderson. She didn't disappoint. "Zoe, have you gained a bit of weight?" she asked, eyeing me up and down. I clenched my teeth. "I don't think so, Mrs. Henderson." She's scared. "You should watch that. Men like Michael need a wife who takes care of herself." Before I could reply, Michael cut in. "Mom, please." "What?" "I'm just looking out for her," she said, her tone innocent. But the damage was done. The rest of the visit was a blur. I couldn't wait to get out of there. Things didn't improve. Every visit to his parents was a test of my patience. Mrs. Henderson's digs at me became more frequent, more personal. And Michael, he just retreated further into his shell. I started spending more time at work, staying late just to avoid going home to an empty house. My boss noticed and appreciated the extra effort, but it was just a distraction from my crumbling marriage. It was during one of those late nights at work when I got a text from Michael. "Eating with Mom and Dad tonight. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, my heart sinking. It was happening again, he was choosing them over me. Over us. I didn't wait up. I couldn't. The loneliness and frustration were too much. I cried myself to sleep that night, mourning the loss of what we once had, fearing what our future might hold. The tension at home was like a thick fog, impossible to ignore. Michael and I had been reduced to grunts and nods, barely acknowledging each other's presence. It was a far cry from the love-filled days we used to know. It was late on a Tuesday when things finally blew up. I was in the living room, flipping through a magazine, trying to find some distraction, when Michael walked in, his face like a thundercloud. "Zoe, we need to talk," he said, his voice low. I put the magazine down, feeling a knot in my stomach. "Okay, what's up?" He took a deep breath. "It's about my mom. She called today. She's upset." I rolled my eyes. "What is it this time?" "She said you were rude to her last time we visited. That you ignored her and were disrespectful." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Rude? Disrespectful? Michael, she's been nothing but mean to me since day one. And you expect me to just take it? He frowned. "She's my mother, Zoe. You could at least try to get along with her." "Try? I've been trying for years. But it's never good enough for her, or for you, it seems." Michael's face turned red. "That's not fair, Zoe. I'm stuck in the middle here. I'm doing my best." "Your best?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Your best is letting her walk all over me. Your best is taking her side every single time." He stepped closer, his voice rising. "What do you want me to do, Zoe? Cut her out of my life? She's all I have left of my family. And what about me? Am I not your family too?" He shook his head, frustration etched on his face. "You just don't get it." "No, Michael, you don't get it. You don't see how much this is hurting me. How much you're hurting me." We stood there, glaring at each other, the years of unsaid frustrations boiling over. It felt like a dam had burst, and all the anger and hurt came pouring out. "Maybe you're just like her," he finally said, his voice cold. "Maybe she's right about you." That hit me like a slap in the face. "Right about me? You think I'm the problem here?" He didn't answer, just turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, shaking with anger and disbelief. That night, we slept in separate rooms. The gap between us had turned into a chasm, and I had no idea how to bridge it. I lay awake, replaying the argument over and over in my head, each time feeling more lost and alone. The next morning, the house was like a battlefield, silent and tense. We avoided each other, moving around in a strained dance of avoidance. I left for work early, the need to escape the oppressive atmosphere overwhelming. At my desk, I tried to focus, but my mind kept drifting back to the argument, to Michael's words. It felt like we had reached a point of no return, and I didn't know how to feel about it. When I got home that evening, the house was empty. Michael's car wasn't in the driveway. I went inside, the silence enveloping me like a cold blanket. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, feeling a deep sense of despair. Hours passed, and there was no sign of Michael. I checked my phone, but there were no messages, no missed calls.